My name is Brooke Shang, and the highest and best use for my business is private lending.
Thanks for tuning into the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about techniques to optimize your land, structure, skill sets, and time, as well as the highest and best use principles to make your business more profitable, productive, and efficient. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. And today, super excited today, we got Brooke Shang on the show. Brooke is from Addison Consulting. She's here to talk about private lending. And Brooke, thanks for being here. This is fantastic.
This is great. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Hello. All right, we're going to make you full screen so you're as big as possible. So I'm really excited to have you on. Today, I want to cover three things in specific related to highest and best use of funding. Obviously, you're a private lender, and this is great for you to be here. So highest and best use of funds, number one. I really want to understand where you're placing your funds these days and why you're doing it. Number two, positives and negatives of lending. What is it about the private lending, that's good, and what is it that's not so good? What are some of the drawbacks? And then lastly, why is lending a good use of capital and a good use of time for everybody, and then specifically for you? So those are the three things that I want to kick it off with, and I'm looking forward to this. So why don't you just tell people who you are and what you're all about?
2017 is when I really started focus on investing. So when I started, I didn't always start with lending. I think first of all, you have to understand different projects. So if you're lending to somebody who's flipping or somebody who is just waiting for a refinance mortgage to come in. So first you have to understand if this project is going to work. So basically, what's the security? What's a collateral? Is it going to work? Are they going to be able to afford what they're going to pay you? So very simple. I just follow four simple rules: how much in, how much out, how long they need the funds for, and what's the security. So usually as simple as that. And I look at it into different categories, meaning short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Usually when you lend to somebody who's flipping, for example, then it could be short-term. So say, for example, they're just fixing a property and they know they're going to sell it. So because your fund is pricier than the bank, for example, so they wouldn't hold it for a very long time. They use your funds for a short period of time. So say, for example, even if it's 10%, 12%, but for a period of, say, 5-6 months, it's not a lot versus the overall of the project in terms of costs. So that's short term. In terms of midterm or long term, I've also helped people to put in the down payment. So sometimes they pay you back, or you could look at it as a joint venture, even though you're basically providing the funds.
Right.
And that's midterm, usually say 2 to 4 years or even up to 5 years. Sometimes that is because they're waiting for the mortgage or the end of the mortgage term. So as you know, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. So it's not as short as somebody who's flipping or who just needs that fund for a short period of time for refinancing. So that to me is midterm. Long term, I don't do a lot of lending for long term per se. It's usually the longest I've done is probably for townhouse development, for example. So you're waiting for them to complete the project. And in that case, I'm basically the mortgage. I look at long term as something you're holding for a long time. So there's so many different strategies in real estate, right? For the long term, I look at it as long-term hold. So usually I do not lend for long term. I usually use my funds long-term for long-term hold. So say, for example, income properties, duplexes, or apartment buildings, or even single family homes. But the point is they have to cash flow, right? Same thing with lending. We usually borrow from ourselves. So it could be from our home line, so HELOC, home equity line of credit, or cheaper ways of getting the funds. So as an investor, don't borrow unless it makes sense for you. The cost is making sense for you to borrow the money and then lend it out. So that's how I look at it in terms of the best use of your funds. Of course, you always get the funds at a lower rate. So you're basically looking at it as a business, right? What's your cost?
Playing
and
the
if
spread.
you're making interest, or your private lending deal will provide you more than what your cost is, basically. So that's how I look at it.
I like that. That's cool. Playing the spread. So borrowing from a line of credit, lending it out, using cash with no debt behind it. You kind of do all of the things, all of the strategies to make that make sense.
Yes.
Very cool. And then when you got started in private lending, you'd mentioned earlier in the show that you were an active investor. Are you still an active investor, or have you transitioned away from that entirely?
I'm still an active investor. So I actually didn't start lending in the beginning because I know there are people with funds, they just want to lend their money out and make their money work. For me, I want to understand what the strategies is about. So I've done a lot of rental deals to start with. And I start to meet a lot of say flippers or wholesalers who could use my funds. However, during the process, I've also converted a few duplexes myself. Then I understand their process as well. So in the very beginning, we're equity partners, meaning we just put in the money together. And then when the property sells, then we kind of pulled our funds out. That's how I started because I want to understand the process. I think
Hmm.
you have to really understand the process in order to understand, hey, how can they pay me back? And what is the market like? Or even how long the refinance is going to take.
Yeah.
So based on the environment today, for example, I've seen refinancing taking a lot longer. So when I lend my funds out, I understand. I kind of have that expectation, even though
That's right.
we wanted to complete the project, say, in half a year. I kind of anticipate it to be 9 months or even a year.
And have you ever had a mortgage that's gone over term unexpectedly? You think it's going to be 6, it ended up being 8, 10, 12, and so on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the longest I think it dragged on for 18 months.
18, 6 months to 18 months.
Yeah.
Holy
I,
smokes. Okay. Tell us about that. What happened?
so in the beginning, we were kind of hoping the project could be done. So that was during COVID. I think that was before COVID when we put the funds in. And for me, luckily, I wasn't an equity partner. Equity partner meaning that whenever the project ended, whatever profit is left. So based on your equity, your percentage of holding, then that's how much profit you get.
Right.
So in a sense, if COVID lasted a long time or construction took longer, that means at the end your holding cost is really high. Whatever is left for the equity partner is less. So another way of structuring it is private lending. So basically, they're both private funds. I should rephrase that. You could be equity partner, or you could be just like the bank. I'm getting a certain percentage per year,
Right.
and that's that. No
So
matter how long you work the project for.
with an equity partner, I guess you would be exposed to profits or losses. Whereas if you're private lending, your rate of return is effectively fixed whether the project makes money or otherwise.
Exactly. So you're like the bank, right? The bank doesn't care if the market goes down. You're still paying a mortgage at a certain percentage. So luckily for this project, I'm the second mortgage, meaning I'm getting a certain percentage of return, regardless of how long it dragged on. Of course, I was a little worried because that wasn't anticipated. We were hoping it could be done from 12 months. So at the end, because the project dragged longer, my return is the same, right? However, in the project, there are also equity partners. Then their return will be lower because they're holding private mortgages for a longer period of time.
Interesting. So
So what
when
happened was during COVID, the contractor taking longer to complete the project, so it dragged longer than anticipated.
so if your return was lower than anticipated, were you a fixed amount? Were you lending a fixed amount, or were you lending at an annual percentage rate?
Annual percentage rate.
So then, for the listeners, so that they can understand, if you're lending at an annual percentage rate and the project takes longer, would the rate of return maintain, and then you just end up making more money overall, or would the amount of money that you make overall maintain, but your rate of return changes?
So the ROI, the rate of return is the same because we are like the bank. It's a certain percentage. So it's double digits. No matter how long the project drags on. So annually, you're getting that certain percentage of return. However, if you're an equity partner, meaning I'm just getting 20% of the loss or profit, for example, then the longer the project drags on, remember you have to pay private lenders at a good percentage for us, right? For private lender for the return. So your overall cost will be more as equity partner. For us as mortgage or private lender, our rate of return is the same. And yes, the overall return will be higher in terms of dollar amount.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So how do you then decide for yourself what is the highest and best use of your funds? Is it being a money lender? Is it being an equity partner? How do you discern that?
So it really depends. I mentioned that I follow four basic rules: how long and how much in, how much out, and what's the security. So when you decide if you want to be an equity partner, in general, equity partners should get more because it depends, right? In general, you were hoping being the equity partner, you're getting more in return because whatever is left is for the equity partner to divvy up, basically. For me, I look at the project. If I don't want to worry about when it's going to finish or how much in total am I going to get back, if I just want certain return, then I would go as a private lender or as the second mortgage or even in the first position as the first mortgage.
Brooke, what about the tax implications of private lending versus owning a physical asset? How do you play that? How do you make that work for you as well?
I think that depends. Full disclosure, I'm not an accountant. I've heard it done both ways. So you also look at the risk, right? I mean, we go through corporation, for example, to reduce the risks in terms of your exposure, because your company will be exposed in a lot of cases as real estate investor. For me, I've done private lending on both sides. I'll tell you why. Because as an investor, I'm sure you have set up some corporations as well, right? So on your personal side, there's not a lot of, say, income tax you have to pay, for example. So sometimes I put the private lending under my personal name because I wouldn't say zero exposure, but there's very little exposure as the lender,
Mhm.
as a person who has a project, who is more exposed, right? So in terms of tax and protection, sometimes I put the private lending under my personal name because I don't pay a lot of personal tax. Everything goes through my company. Even my day job here. That's this goes through my corporation as well. So it's active income. But according to my accountant, capital gain or private lending proceeds, it doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of how much tax saving you have. So
Mhm.
you look at protection. Am I really exposed? As equity partner, yes, you're exposed. As a private lender, you're like the bank. Your name is not on title whatsoever. As equity partner, my name has been on title before. So for that kind of lending, I channel through my cooperation.
Mhm.
For other side of lending, like I mentioned, I've done it through my corporation. I've also done it through my personal name. I've done it through my corporation because it's easier for me to keep track. Whatever capital income, for example, holding properties, or as money partner, for example, I put it under one corporation for accounting purpose and bookkeeping purpose. So
It's
it's
easier for you to
easier.
track. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's kind of cool how you can say, okay, this one we're going to lend personally, or this one we're going to lend corporately because of something like a tax implication. If you're comfortable with the risk, where are you going to save the most amount of money in taxes and thereby keep the most amount of money so that you have the most amount of money to lend out the next year?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I like that.
So look at both.
I like that. What are some of the positives? We'll do positives and negatives. So, what are some of the positives? Some like your top three favorite things of private lending.
Because we're talking about the highest use. So I like the fact that it's really passive. I know if you've done a few projects as well where you're really active. I've done that as well. When you have the capital accumulated in your bucket of income waiting to work for you, I think that's truly when your money works for you. So the biggest benefit I see is being really passive. That's number one. So save your time. I've known people who wanted to save time or something happens in life for health reason or wanting to spend more time with the family. So you save a lot of time. However, I think on the flip side, when you talk about the negative, is I do think people have to understand the project. It's like you can put money in REITs or pre-construction condo, for example. However, I found that in those cases, sure, they're big companies, reputable companies who do deals like that. For me, being an investor is about control. So then on the flip side is if you're really passive, you don't really have a lot of control. Being educated and understand how each project works, that kind of give you some control over it. However, if you just want to be really passive, I still would say learn how each strategy works so you know where your money goes in the end. So on the positive side is very passive and you basically sleep and your money works for you. On the other side is yes, it could be very passive and you don't have overall control over it. I did get burned once for a project really early on in my investment career or journey. And I think that's because I just fully trusted the other party. I didn't understand the market. That was actually my first apartment building investment and more due diligence. So it actually took me a while to get into lending again. However, lending is when I finally got financial freedom, probably one deal. So I worked really actively in lease option and long-term holds and income properties in the beginning. However, it's when I built some capital and started lending that I started to see how fast money could work for you.
Interesting. I totally agree with your whole strategy of understanding where your money is going and understanding the mechanics of what that investor is doing with the funds. Because, you could just send your money out blindly and hope it comes back. But when you really know this person's doing a basement apartment or this person's doing a construction project, in addition, you mentioned an apartment building that kind of went negative. Like you learn and you grow from that, right? And
Oh, you always do.
okay,
When a
so
project succeeds, yeah.
so what do you think the biggest takeaway from a project that went south would be? Like how do you change your mind to say, or change your brain to say, okay, I'm still going to do this. This is the right strategy for me, but I'm going to do it differently.
That's a good point. So I did learn about you really have to do the due diligence. And when we say BRRRR, it doesn't have to just be a duplex or a small project. We were doing a BRRRR basically on an apartment building as well. So you really have to have a trustworthy team to make it work. So basically, the contractor took the money and kept asking for more to complete the project. And in the end, there just wasn't enough. I look at it as a lesson learned for sure. And I quickly turn around to say, okay, what can I do to make that money back? So full disclosure, because I put it in my book, so everybody knows about it. I lost $50,000 on it. So I was thinking, how can I make another $50,000 to make it work? I think for any investment project or even your overall portfolio, say for example, you even do that. I don't think, I mean, you have a nice car, but I mean, most people say, hey, save up and then you can have money to invest. I do think you can splurge a little bit. And even when you lose money or you need another $100,000 to buy your own home or renovate your house or buy a really nice car, buy a boat, go for a nice trip, you look at how you make that money back. So my biggest lesson learned is, yes, I lost that money. I quickly made it back. And same thing with change of lifestyle. If I want to buy something, so I'm currently building my own home, and it's an infill project from ground up. We tear it down, etc. However, it is a big project. How do I find more deals, or what kind of deals, or even lending? What kind of lending deals, or how many deals do I need in my portfolio in order to fund that? So that's the biggest lesson learned. I lost $50,000. How can I make that money back?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. So if we change gears a little bit and talk about, you had mentioned all of these deals that you have coming up. How do you balance private lending with your 9 to 5 job?
That's an interesting thing. I think people want something passive because they want to have time to do something else. And I look at my job the same way. We set up a system. So whatever I need somebody to help me, be open to have somebody on your power team. So say, for example, if I'm really busy with work, so sometimes there are projects. Right now, we're good because everything is stable. And actually, this is kind of passive too, once you have a system set up. So if you want something passive, at least accumulate some capital, then start a private lending. I'll give you another example. You don't even have to have your own funds. I mentioned that I use my HELOC to start lending, to start getting educated. For some people, I also have investors. Say, for example, they just want a 6% to 8% return and they want to invest with me. However, if I'm waiting for a project to come up and I don't have a project right now, I know somebody that I really trust and I've lent my money to this person before. Say, for example, they're paying me 10% and I'm wholesaling the funds as well. I'm just channeling somebody's money to somebody else's. So that's really passive too. However, I don't suggest, sorry, I don't suggest everybody should get into that. You have to have somebody you can trust, somebody you've been in projects in the past with. That's at least how I look at it. So it doesn't even have to be your fund. Even if you don't have HELOC, you don't have equity in your house, you don't have money saved up, even if you have some RSP, you can lend your RSP in the right way and learn
Mhm.
how to do that legally, of course. Or do you just have a credit card? So recently I have two credit cards that offers 1.9% transfer fee and another one offers 3%. However, it's 0% for 1 year. So with two credit cards, I accumulated $30,000. I could use that money to lend as well. So if you just understand how credit or debt or money works, it's really not that hard.
That's great. How much money do you think somebody would need to get into private lending?
I've seen as little as $20,000. It doesn't have to be a lot. I'll give you an example. I helped somebody with a flip project. They only needed some money to complete the landscaping to put it on the market. So that was the smallest deal I've done so far. That was $20,000 at
Nice. And
12%.
would something like that at 12%, would something like that be registered as a first mortgage, a second, a third? Where would that fall in terms of title?
That one is actually promissory note.
Prom note. Easy. Easy. Can you explain
Yeah.
what a prom note is?
So basically, I know sometimes in the promissory note, you have a promise to pay basically. However, if anything goes wrong, you still have the rights to put a caveat on the property, or it doesn't even have to be a property, it could be something of value. I've never done this. However, I know there are investors who put their boat, their car, anything valuable as a collateral, or their truck, their mobile homes, whatever is valuable, and it depends on the amount. So you could put that as the collateral. I mentioned collateral, basically your security, as long as there's value to it, then you can do that. So in my case, when I did the $20,000, it was actually the contractor's truck.
That's a key tool. That's a key, that's like a hammer in a tool pouch. You gotta have a truck to be a contractor, or you're in trouble. It's funny. Sometimes I would be tied up on various construction projects just over the years. So I'd call, 5 new people to say, hey, we're looking to grow. And I'd call a handyman, for example, and 3 of the 5 handymen that would show up in like a small car or somebody else's car, or a rented van. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I can't trust you to have your own vehicle, like how am I going to trust you to fix my house? You know what I mean? So having a lien on somebody's truck would be pretty important for sure if they don't pay you back.
Because you know
Absolutely.
what they need to keep their business going, basically.
Yeah, it's the lifeline. You mentioned RSPs, so something like Olympia Trust, is that who you would typically deal with, or is there a different company that you recommend?
Right now, so Olympia Trust, I know in the past there were other companies. There are fewer and fewer institutions that provide the service, basically channel the funds. So one thing I want to mention is sometimes if your fund is not already in Olympia Trust yet, that takes some time because you might transfer from your bank, put in Olympia Trust, etc. That's one thing. So sometimes investors are asking, if I don't have anywhere to invest right now, I don't want to put my money in Olympia Trust because there's a fee associated. However, at the same time, you have to be ready. So it depends. I think also it has to be done legally. So I cannot put my own RSP into my own project. So there's several things you need to consider before you engage your RSP. I mentioned first, it takes some time. So you have to put your funds into Olympia Trust first for whoever you're working with to engage that fund and start make your money work. However, it's chicken and egg story. Should I put the funds in and invest first? I say if you are actively investing and you have a network, like we do, or already in the real estate community, then put your funds there because you want to be ready. Then the cost of putting the funds there, or the cost, we usually say the cost of borrowing. So the cost of funds or the cost of keeping Olympia Trust account is worth it. Then you're ready to get into the next project quickly. So first, get yourself ready. Second, do it legally for sure. And third, still the investment has to make sense. I just learned something from my accountant. An example of when it makes sense. So if you put your money into RSP, and if it's capital investment, we're only taxed based on 50% of the capital gain. However, if you put in RSP once you take it out, you don't have that benefit anymore. So when you start to put money in RSP or use the RSP funds to invest, you have to think if it makes sense. If it's capital investment, then you have to think you're going to lose the benefit of capital gain tax in the future when you take it out. So it's things like that. First, understand how it works. Second, be legal. And third, it has to make sense. As simple as that.
Yeah, some of those tax strategies are so important, especially when you get into RSP lending, because I mean, like you say, if you lend money out, you take it out of your RSP, you know, and you pay tax on it, well, you lose a lot of those benefits of having money in there tax free already. In terms of somebody like these RSP lending institutions, whether you have $1 in the account or $1 million or more or less, do the fee structures change or are the fee structures fixed?
As a borrower, not really. So same thing. You have the lawyer fee, etc. It's basically like forwarding a mortgage. The only difference is, yes, you have to put in the trust. You have to go through a lawyer. The difference is the fund is coming from the RSP of your money partner or your private lender.
Okay. And then what about arm's length versus non-arm's length? You mentioned obviously being legal and being compliant. What is the importance of that and what do those mean?
So arm's length basically means it cannot be somebody close to you, cannot be your spouse, cannot be your mom, cannot be your kid. And somebody asked me, is it okay to be my in-law? No, because you and your husband's money are basically together. So it's things like that. Make sure you follow the law. So it's far enough from you. You're not basically using your own money. That's the idea. So you're not doing that. And I've also have investors who mentioned, can we swap RSP? However, it cannot be a direct swap. So Ryan, I'm not investing 80,000 in your project. You're investing 80,000 in my project, and we're both charging 10%. That's
Right.
pretty obvious. You're basically using your funds. So no, you're not able to do that either.
Gotcha. I've heard of people doing a three-way swap. I don't know if that's legal or not. Is that a legal strategy?
I would say don't make it too obvious. If you're all lending out 80,000 at 10%, that's pretty obvious. So I would do it differently. So full disclaimer, I never done that. However, this makes sense to me. At least have three parties and don't charge the same interest. Perhaps, for example, I'm lending you 90,000. You're lending out 100,000 or 80,000, and don't charge the same interest. We can do 8%, and you can do 9%, that kind of thing. Don't do exactly the same to make it look like a pretty obvious swap.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
probably four parties. If you think three party is too obvious, do a four party. So basically, then that becomes more like a crowdfunding, right? So I'll give you an example. When people talk about private lending, somebody was telling me, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable not having my name on title." Sure, then basically do equity or GPLP. There's so many different ways. It doesn't matter, basically, as long as you have funds to make the money work or to fund the project. I think it's like the bank. The bank doesn't have to be on title, but they have control. If you don't pay the mortgage, they
That's
have
right. They'll
control
take
over
it.
that.
Yeah. Tell us about your book.
Oh, okay. I have to have it with me. I basically have my book everywhere with me. It's basically my journey when I started. I don't think everybody should just jump in and start real estate investing. I was educated, I follow a system. So I basically use the same system to explain how I started investing as a seasoned investor. So I focus on my goal first, then I focus on the strategy, the market, the property is always last. I also have investors who have been telling me we have a problem property. How do we deal with it? I always think you have to, like I mentioned, focus on your goal first. So if we're thinking about, hey, at first I just wanted to verify that real estate actually works. So my first goal was to see if just focus on real estate investing, can my income from real estate investing cover the basically replace my working income. This is my day job. So basically cover my income and my 9 to 5 income. That was my first goal. And then I mentioned I lost $50,000 and I didn't put that down as a goal. However, subconsciously, I wanted to make sure I can make that money back. And funny enough, another project I had covers exactly $50,000 shortly after. Maybe that's how things work. So I basically start my book from the mindset, what kind of mindset you should have. It's always uncomfortable as an investor because I don't think it's for everybody. However, I think everybody should learn how this works, how money works at least, in order to navigate through life, because money is a big part of our life. You really cannot have a good quality of life if you always have to focus on survival. So I focus on the mindset. You have to have your goal. And I put in several strategies. I have 3 strategies in my book. Actually, I wanted to put in more. Probably that's another book. Or once you have your portfolio built up, what's the next step? So that might be my next book. So in the first book, I mentioned lease options, so rental, wholesale, and private lending.
That's great. That's great. Did you wrote the book yourself?
I wrote the book myself, yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. What's
I didn't
it
have a
called?
ghostwriter.
What's it called and where can people find it?
It's on Amazon called Financial Freedom the Royal Way. If you just Google my name, it will come up.
That's fantastic. Brooke, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to learn more about you, how can they reach out?
My name is pretty unique, funny enough. So if you just Google Brooke Shang on any social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, there's only one me.
That's great. And that's Brooke, Brooke Shang.
Yes.
Online. Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you again so much for being here. We learned a lot today. For anybody listening over the audio format, that's fantastic. For anybody listening over the video format or watching over the video format, obviously, we can see the excitement in Brooke's face. And every time you talk about private lending and how it's meshing with your life, you really do light up. So thank you for bringing some light today to private lending. And thank you for being here. Cut in the money earrings. I love that. That's fantastic. Thanks again for listening to the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast. Reminder to sign for the book at thehighestandbestuse.com. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode.